If you are watching this on March 23rd, 2026, stop what you are doing right now, because what just happened between the United States and Canada in the last 48 hours is something that every single American and Canadian needs to hear. Not tomorrow, right now. Because the mainstream media is going to bury this under celebrity gossip and political theater, and by tomorrow morning, most people will have no idea that the most important trade relationship in the entire Western world just came within inches of completely falling apart. And I am not exaggerating. I need you to stay with me through this entire video, because by the end of it, you are going to understand exactly why your grocery bill, your gas prices, your job security, and America's standing in the world are all on the line right now because of decisions being made in Ottawa and Washington that nobody is talking about loudly enough. So here is what actually happened. The United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, just went on record and publicly admitted something that no sitting ambassador should ever have to admit. He admitted that trade negotiations with Canada have essentially hit a wall. Not slowed down, not paused for the holidays, hit a wall. A full diplomatic breakdown between two countries that have shared the longest peaceful border on the planet for over a century. And when the reporter asked him to explain why talks had stalled, his answer was devastating. He said they were facing headwinds. Headwinds. That is the diplomatic equivalent of a surgeon walking out of an operating room and telling the family the patient is not doing great. It sounds measured, it sounds controlled, but everyone in that hallway knows exactly what it means. Now let me set the full scene for you, because context is everything here. Back on March 13th, 2026, Canada did something that signaled to the entire world that they were no longer playing defense. They implemented $20 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs against American goods. Not a symbolic gesture, not a warning shot fired into the air, a full-scale economic counterattack aimed directly at American steel, aluminum, and cast iron products that American factories depend on every single day just to keep their assembly lines running. And they did not stop there. While those tariffs were going into effect, Canada simultaneously filed a legal complaint at the World Trade Organization, arguing that Trump's tariffs violate international trade law that has governed global commerce since 1994. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. The European Union is now considering joining Canada's complaint. Think about what that means for a moment. America's closest ally and largest trading partner dragged us into international court, and the entire European Union might pile on. When was the last time you saw something like that happen in your lifetime? But here is where the story gets personal, and this is the part that the cable news networks are glossing over completely. Ambassador Hoekstra, Trump's own hand-picked representative sitting in Ottawa right now, went out and admitted publicly that there are no substantive talks happening with Canada. Zero. And do you know why there are no substantive talks? Because Prime Minister Mark Carney walked away from the table. Not stepped back, not requested a recess. He walked away entirely. And if you do not understand who Mark Carney is, you need to understand this immediately, because it changes everything about how you interpret what is happening right now. This is not some career politician who stumbled into a trade dispute. This is the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the former governor of the Bank of England. This is one of the most economically sophisticated leaders on the planet, a man who understands monetary policy, trade frameworks, and global financial systems at a depth that almost nobody else currently holding political office anywhere in the world can match. When a man like that decides to walk away from negotiations, he is not doing it emotionally. He is doing it because he has run the numbers and concluded that staying at the table does more damage than leaving it. And what did Carney actually say publicly? He said Canada has moved beyond bilateral negotiation with this administration. Read that sentence again slowly. Canada has moved beyond bilateral negotiation with this administration. That is not diplomatic language. That is a breakup. That is one party in a long-term relationship looking the other person in the eye and saying, we are no longer trying to make this work with you specifically. We are done pretending you negotiate honestly. We are going to build our future with partners who actually honor what they agreed to. He did not say partners we prefer. He specifically said partners who honor their commitments. That is a direct accusation. That is Canada standing on the world stage and telling every country watching that the United States of America under this administration does not keep its word. And the brutal reality is that the evidence supports him. Because while all of this was unfolding, Trump has been publicly questioning whether CUSMA, the very trade agreement he personally renegotiated and signed just years ago, should even continue to exist. He called it irrelevant. He suggested it may have served its purpose. This is an agreement that governs over $1 trillion in annual trade between three countries, an agreement that American farmers wake up every morning depending on, an agreement that keeps manufacturing workers employed in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the sitting president of the United States is casually floating the idea of just walking away from it while his ambassador sits in Ottawa with absolutely nothing to offer. But it gets worse. The U.S. trade representative has started floating the idea of scrapping the trilateral CUSMA framework entirely and replacing it with separate bilateral deals negotiated with Canada and Mexico individually. And if you understand anything about negotiating strategy, you immediately recognize what that is. It is divide and conquer. It is the oldest power play in the book. You separate two parties who are stronger together, you isolate each of them, and then you squeeze better terms out of both of them individually because they cannot coordinate a unified response. It is the same playbook used by every authoritarian leader in modern history. Break up the alliance, isolate the opponents, manufacture chaos, and then position yourself as the only one who can end it. Let us talk about the justifications Trump used for imposing these tariffs in the first place, because they are worth examining in detail. He claimed he needed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods because of fentanyl flowing across the northern border, fentanyl from Canada. Now, if you have spent even 5 minutes looking at the actual seizure data from U.S. Customs, you already know that the fentanyl devastating American communities is coming predominantly through the southern border and arriving from Chinese chemical suppliers. The amount of fentanyl intercepted at the Canadian border is statistically a rounding error compared to what comes through Mexico. It is not even close. But Trump needed a story that would frighten the American public into believing that Canada posed some kind of threat. So he manufactured one. He also claimed that illegal immigration from Canada was a crisis serious enough to justify tariffs. Illegal immigration from Canada, a country with universal health care, strong social safety nets, stable institutions, and by most quality of life measurements, a higher standard of living than the United States. The very idea that there is a wave of desperate illegal crossings from Canada into America would be laughable if it were not being used as the official justification for economic policies that are already raising prices in American grocery stores. Mark Carney called out these lies publicly, not in a quiet diplomatic cable, not in a carefully worded statement designed to avoid controversy. He did it loudly and openly because he understands something important. Trump's approval rating in Canada is essentially non-existent. Standing up to American bullying is not a political risk for Carney in Canada. It is a political gold mine. His approval ratings have surged since he began taking this hardline position. Every time Trump threatens a new tariff, Carney's numbers go up because Canadians are watching their leader defend their country with spine and clarity, and they respect it enormously. Now, here is something that most analysts covering this story are completely missing. The ongoing conflict with Iran has fundamentally shifted the leverage in this trade dispute, and it has shifted it in Canada's favor in ways that Trump apparently did not anticipate. When oil prices spike, when fertilizer becomes scarce, when global supply chains fracture because of instability in the Middle East, suddenly having a stable, friendly, resource-rich neighbor directly on your border becomes extraordinarily valuable. Canada is one of the world's largest producers of oil, natural gas, uranium, potash, lithium, and rare earth elements. All of the things that America desperately needs right now, especially with American consumers already paying around $6 a gallon for gasoline because of the Iran conflict. The last thing the United States can afford economically or politically right now is a resource trade war with a country sitting directly to its north. And Ambassador Hoekstra himself essentially confirmed this desperation in his public comments. He urged Canada to prioritize developing its energy and mineral sectors in order to secure lower tariff brackets. Read that carefully. He is begging Canada to keep supplying America with critical resources while Trump simultaneously threatens them with punishing tariffs. He is offering no concessions. He is providing no guarantees. He is just demanding that Canadian companies invest billions of dollars developing resources for the American market, while the American president calls the trade agreement irrelevant and waves around threats of additional tariffs. No serious business leader or government official is going to make generational investment decisions based on promises from an administration that has already demonstrated it tears up agreements the moment they become inconvenient. Let us talk about what actually happens if CUSMA is not renewed when the July 2026 review deadline arrives, because this is the part that affects you directly, regardless of where you live. If that agreement collapses, trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico defaults back to World Trade Organization baseline rules. That means tariffs go up across the board on everything. American exports to Canada face Canadian tariffs that do not currently exist. Canadian exports to America face American tariffs on top of the ones already in place. Supply chains that companies spent decades and billions of dollars building around the assumption of frictionless cross-border movement would have to be completely reorganized, a process that takes years and costs billions more. The auto industry alone would be catastrophically disrupted. Cars assembled in the United States contain engines from Canada and transmissions from Mexico. The steel in those engines may have crossed the border multiple times during processing. You cannot surgically separate Canadian trade from Mexican trade without essentially dismantling the entire integrated North American manufacturing ecosystem that has developed over 30 years. American agriculture would suffer enormously. Canada is currently the #1 export destination for American agricultural products. If CUSMA collapses and Canada responds with agricultural tariffs, American farmers, who are already financially stressed from years of trade uncertainty, would face losses severe enough to push many of them into bankruptcy. Energy markets would be thrown into chaos at exactly the moment when global energy instability is already pushing household costs to breaking point. The United States imports millions of barrels of Canadian oil every single day. Natural gas flows in both directions across that border, keeping homes heated and lights on in both countries. If that energy cooperation breaks down because of a trade war that did not have to happen, both countries pay the price every single winter going forward. Here is what makes the situation even more significant on the global stage. Canada and Mexico have already coordinated their response to Trump's divide and conquer strategy. They have been in extensive communication about his negotiating tactics, and they both understand that allowing themselves to be separated and picked off individually would result in worse outcomes for each of them. Mexico has its own long memory of Trump's tariff threats and immigration rhetoric, and there is absolutely no incentive for Mexico to abandon Canada and try to negotiate alone with an administration that has shown it will impose punishing tariffs for political reasons, completely unrelated to actual trade policy. So what you are actually watching unfold is not America successfully dividing its trading partners. You are watching Canada and Mexico present a unified front where threats against one produce solidarity from the other, which is the exact opposite of what Trump's strategy required to work. And while Trump has been focused on punishing and threatening, Carney has been building. He has strengthened Canada's relationship with the European Union, which represents a larger combined market than the United States. He has been pursuing deeper economic ties with Japan, South Korea, and other Asia-Pacific economies that are growing faster than North America. He has been actively positioning Canada as a stable, predictable, rule-following alternative to American suppliers for every country in the world that is exhausted by the chaos emanating from Washington. Canada is essentially rebranding itself in real time as the anti-chaos option. Reliable trade policy, genuine commitment to international agreements, cooperation as a default rather than confrontation. And it is working. European leaders who have to deal with Trump's unpredictability find working with Carney to be an entirely different experience. Asian governments that want access to Western markets without the volatility of direct American exposure are increasingly looking at Canada as the bridge they need. This is a long-term realignment that will outlast this administration, regardless of what happens at the July deadline. Even if a new administration takes office in 2029, genuinely wanting to repair this relationship, the damage will already be structural. Canadian companies will have found reliable alternative customers. Canadian politicians will have institutionalized the lesson that overdependence on American markets is a strategic vulnerability that must be diversified away from. The deep economic integration that has defined North America for generations will have fractured in ways that take decades to rebuild, if they can be rebuilt at all. What we are witnessing right now is a complete and historic failure of American diplomacy. The United States used to be the country that constructed the frameworks of international cooperation, that led global institutions, that turned rivals into allies through the consistent honoring of commitments. Under this administration, we have become the country that weaponizes those frameworks, alienates the allies who built them alongside us, and then calls the resulting chaos strength. Ambassador Hoekstra's public admission that talks have completely stalled is just the most recent and visible symbol of how thoroughly broken this has become. America's top diplomat in one of its most critical bilateral relationships cannot even keep a basic conversation going. That is not Canada's failure. That is a failure of American statecraft, so profound that it will be studied in foreign policy programs for the next 50 years. The July 2026 deadline is now less than 4 months away. Every single day that passes without real negotiations is another day closer to the potential collapse of the most economically significant trade agreement in North American history. Every statement from Trump questioning CUSMA's value makes it structurally harder for Canada to trust American intentions, even if the rhetoric eventually softens. Every new tariff threat, every casual insult, every ambassador who goes on television to complain rather than to offer something real pushes both countries one step closer to economic divorce. Mark Carney has drawn his line clearly. He will not negotiate under terms designed to extract maximum benefit for the United States at Canada's expense. He will not make decisions about Canadian resources based on demands from an ambassador representing a president who has already demonstrated he does not honor agreements. He is prepared to let CUSMA expire rather than sign Canada up for economic subordination dressed up as partnership. And based on everything we have seen from this administration, there is no realistic path to the kind of genuine concessions that would bring Canada back to the table before July arrives. Which means the smart assessment right now is that we are heading toward either CUSMA's collapse or a severely weakened annual review process that creates permanent investment-killing uncertainty for every business operating across this border. Either outcome is a disaster. Either outcome was completely preventable. And either outcome will fall hardest on the workers, the farmers, the manufacturers, and the families who depend on North American economic cooperation for their livelihoods every single day. That is the story. That is what is at stake. And July is coming faster than anyone in Washington seems to understand.